Hi, and welcome to Experience Points by University XP. On Experience Points, we explore different ways we can learn from games. I'm your host, Dave Ang from Games-Based Learning by University XP. Find out more by going to universityxp.com. Today, we're diving into two little words that have the power to either catapult your project forward or completely derail it. Those words, constraints and scope creep. Maybe you've heard them thrown around in design meetings. Maybe you've bumped into them the hard way on your own projects. Either way, by the end of this episode, you'll see why understanding these two forces and learning to wield them wisely is absolutely essential to your success as a designer. Let's start with a quick scene. Picture this. You finally decided to make your first game. You're buzzing with ideas. Maybe it's a slick digital platformer or a cozy board game about running a tiny cafe, or maybe even a clever learning game for your classroom. You can see the art, the mechanics, the clever little rules, and then reality hits. Suddenly, you're knee-deep in spreadsheets. You're trying to figure out how many components you can realistically afford, or whether your target audience actually has the skills or interest to navigate that giant branching story you've built, or how many hours it would take to develop the intricate systems you've dreamed up. Does this sound familiar? That's where constraints come into the picture. Now, on the surface, constraints might seem like the fun killers of the creative process, right? After all, who wants to be told, no, you can't do that? But here's the twist. Constraints are often exactly what your project needs to flourish. Because constraints don't just box you in. They give your creativity shape. They force you to focus. They transform your sprawling ideas into something tangible, something players can actually experience. Think about it. If you try to design a game without any limitations, no cap on components, no rules for scope, no clear idea of what your players can actually handle, you end up with a Frankenstein monster. It's bloated, hard to finish, and confusing to play. And most of the time, it never even makes it to the player. So instead, let's look at constraints as our partners in creativity. Let's dig into some examples. First up, player constraints. These are the limitations that come from your audience. Maybe they're kids who can't sit still for more than 10 minutes. Maybe they're older adults who need simpler controls, larger text, or slower-paced gameplay, or maybe they're players who simply prefer bite-sized games. When you know these constraints, you can design with compassion and clarity. You can build systems that honor players' physical, cognitive, or even emotional boundaries without sacrificing fun. Next, we've got constraints in the rules themselves. In video games, rules are hard-coded. The software literally stops a player from walking through walls or carrying 200 swords. In board games, it's a little different. You've probably heard of house rules, people tweaking the rules at home. But even then, players tend to stick to your framework because they want to stay inside the magic circle of the game world. And that's the beautiful thing about rules as constraints. They create expectations. They shape the experience. They tell players, this is the universe you're entering, and here's what's possible inside it. Now, here's something a lot of new designers overlook. Constraints can also be self-imposed. Think about those minimalist challenges, like, can I design a game using only 12 cards? Or, what happens if I create an entire story-driven game with zero written dialogue? By setting your own boundaries, you're actually freeing up brain power. Instead of flailing around in infinite possibilities, you're laser-focused on solving a very specific puzzle. And sometimes that puzzle is imposed by the very components you have on hand. Tabletop designers know this well. There's a tradition of creating games that fit inside a mint tin. Just a handful of cards, maybe some tiny tokens, or using generic meeples instead of costly custom miniatures. This doesn't just keep costs down. It forces you to think deeply about how each piece contributes to the player experience. Of course, it's not all about cutting back. Constraints can spark surprising creativity, like choosing a well-known genre, say high fantasy, but flipping it on its head by telling the story entirely through color swatches. That's literally the premise behind Pantone, the game where players use simple color blocks to represent famous characters. Now, let's talk about the dark side, scope creep. If you've ever added just one more feature, and then another, and another, until your project timeline has quadrupled and your design doc looks like a messy novel, congratulations. You've met scope creep. It's the silent killer of so many brilliant ideas. Projects stall, budgets explode, and teams burn out. Or if you're flying solo, your enthusiasm fizzles out under the weight of a game that simply got too big. So how do we keep scope creep at bay? It starts by identifying your game's core identity. What's the one thing this game absolutely needs to be itself? Maybe it's a tense social deduction mechanic. Maybe it's the joy of rolling chunky dice and seeing what chaos unfolds. Maybe it's the quiet pleasure of building an engine that clicks perfectly into place. Whatever it is, guard it fiercely. Then try stripping away every other feature one by one and ask yourself, is this still my game? And does it still achieve my goals? If yes, you probably don't need that extra bit. This is how you hone in on your minimum viable product, the simplest version of your game that's still fun, functional, and fulfilling. It's also why game jams are so magical. In case you're new to the term, game jams are short, intense events. Think 24 to 72 hours, where people come together to build games from scratch. They're notorious for throwing wild constraints at participants, which often include limited time, weird themes, and strict component lists. And yet, under this pressure, designers often create some of the most brilliant experimental stuff out there. Because there's simply no room for scope creep, you're forced to decide what matters right now, and that kind of disciplined creativity, it can be pure gold. So what does all this mean for your own game design journey? It means that rather than seeing constraints as shackles, you can treat them as a framework, a sandbox to play in. They help you avoid the endless swirl of what ifs and keep you focused on what really delivers joy and meaning to your players. And when it comes to scope creep, your best weapons are clarity and communication. Especially if you're working on a team, set clear roles. Revisit your design document regularly. Create a formal way to vet new ideas so every shiny addition doesn't derail your timeline. Finally, don't forget to prototype, playtest, and iterate. It's amazing how many unnecessary features reveal themselves when you watch players actually interact with your game. You might realize a certain mechanic just bogs things down, or that by removing a component, you see that the core loop shines even brighter. And that's the sweet spot. A game that feels inevitable, like every piece belongs, where the constraints you've embraced actually enhances the player experience instead of cluttering it. So there you have it. Constraints and scope creep. Two sides of the same design coin. Handle them well and you'll build games that are focused, innovative, and deeply satisfying. Let them run wild and well. Your brilliant idea might never see the light of day. I hope you found this episode useful. If you'd like to learn more, then a great place to start is with my free course on gamification. You can sign up for it at universityxp.com/gamification. You can also get a full transcript of this episode, including links to references in the description or show notes. Thanks for joining me. Again, I'm your host, Dave Eng from Game-Based Learning by University XP. On Experience Points, we explore different ways we can learn from games. If you like this episode, please consider commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Subscribing is absolutely free and ensures that you'll get the next episode of Experience Points delivered directly to you. I'd also love it if you took some time to rate the show. I live to lift others with learning, so if you found this episode useful, consider sharing it with someone who could also benefit. Also, make sure to visit University XP online at universityxp.com. University XP is also on Twitter at university_XP and on Facebook and LinkedIn as University XP. Also, feel free to email me anytime. My email address is dave@universityxp.com. Game on.